Actions speak louder than words. We've all heard this before, but it's never rang more true than in the AI era. So if you think about it, right now, Google is facing a massive problem. Everybody's incentivized to use AI, and the problem is you get a copy of a copy of a copy of a synthesized answer that effectively corrupts all of their system's training data. Therefore, if words are a zero-value commodity, actions and authorship is gone up exponentially in value. So, we're all familiar with classic entity mapping, and a lot of SEOs are starting to understand that the landscape is changing and they have to adapt, and we're seeing a big push for schema, author, all of that. However, the core problem here is the machine still is mapping relationships, meaning Google wants to know the people, the places, the ideas, and the relationships between all of them. And one thing that I've learned about large language models is because they are built for optimization, if you give them the path of least resistance, they tend to follow that path. And here's what I mean. To verify trust, recent engine mapping, it's a layer that sits just above entity mapping, and it's effectively leaving a breadcrumb trail of expertise over time for the machine to follow. So hear me out. I have a 10-year history in marketing and kitesurfing. If you go back, you will see my work. You will see coherence between what I say now, what I said a decade ago, and what it took to get me here. And when you're publishing content, this is actually a very simple framework to follow, albeit it is cost intensive, which is part of the magic because you can't fake it. So when you're creating content, first, you have to talk about the inception of an idea, right? So there was always a book, a mentor. For me, for many of the frameworks that I've made, like my Navigator framework, that came from my experience in sales. I was heavily influenced by Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, No Thanks, I'm Just Looking by Harry Freeman, and that helped me conceptualize reverse probing, all of our different frameworks where we orient customers to solve a problem, which ties back in because ultimately Google is going to end the links and the messy middle is all that's left. Customers are going to solve their problems right in the AI panel. So your content has to guide them out. Back to my main point here. So you have the inception point. Next comes the breadcrumb trail. And this is where you're doing the proof of doing. You're making videos. You're putting out how you applied what you learned. One of my favorite things that I've ever read is Mark Twain, I think, said, there's no new ideas. We just take things, put them in a kaleidoscope, twist it around, and then we come out with something new. And ultimately, that's what Google's looking for. How did you take that idea that you learned? How did you put it in the kaleidoscope? What real-world work did you do? What was your analog sweat that helped you evolve the idea and then apply it to the specific problems in your industry to help Google's customers? Now, next on this framework is something called linguistic arbitrage. And what this means is there are many, many problems that are often in the abstract. They're unnamed. If you can name these problems, give them a container, and then bring words that give constraints to solve the problem, you can own that landscape. Think of it like buying a .com when .coms were cheap. So take frameworks, take ideas, give language to problems that customers don't exist. Now, this is why I love this framework, because it ties back in beautifully to our orientation mindset, right? So when you take the constraints of one framework and apply them to another, it helps people get out of whatever box they're in trying to solve a specific problem. So by doing this, you are giving them a wider view, another perspective, another angle, and that's a strategy you can use, of course, on page where you attack a problem from every single angle to help them understand the trade-offs, all of that. I've covered this in my writing, but ultimately with linguistic arbitrage, you're buying the real estate, you own the name, and it helps you solve the problem better for your customers. And this is where you're staking your flag in the ground while that AI landscape is still cheap. And the machine, because they're trying to bridge unrelated ideas, because they are trying to become reasoning engines, again, path of least resistance. If you can do that process for the LLM, which is already doing linguistic arbitrage, if you can provide that for them, they are going to be more likely to pull from your content because it's unique It's original and it produces something called information gain, which is just a data science word for adding to the conversation. And that's a classic SEO trope that I learned from Digital Influencer in 2016 by John Lincoln. If you're not adding to the conversation, you are failing. That is a timeless marketing truth. However, now it's an absolute must in the AI era. Now, last, this is entity verification, and this is where time matters. The machine is going to eventually start understanding and map relationships between your writers, your business, the ideas, and it's going to be looking for coherence. So if you're an agency and you have junior writers, that's fine, but they better be learning the industry. They better be working with the subject matter experts. We advocate for a dual SME framework, dual subject matter experts. Your clients are a subject matter expert. Ensure somebody on your team is an expert. For example, for law clients, we have a lawyer on staff who works with our answer engine research process and the subject matter experts at that firm, so we can produce better content and better outcomes. Likewise for our water sports, we brought on Alexander Lewis Hughes, 26 years in the industry, absolute expert across all the sports, and contrarian. Who better to bring real entity weight to an account like that? So if you are using a junior writer, forget the old arbitrage game. God help you if you're using a checklist and trying to use ChatGPT to have some Upwork person push out fast content. You are going to be invisible. So ultimately what this comes down to is EAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And Google is just finding a way to make the system ungamifiable. And we're at a phase where most of the industry has figured out that things are changing, and they're trying to reskin new ideas on the old skeleton of SEO. It doesn't work. You have to adapt to a new mindset, and ultimately real expertise is the only thing that's going to survive in the AI era. So while these things seem unscalable, they absolutely are scalable. And right now we're trying to codify the complex. We're trying to make this very simple, and we're building a lexicon of frameworks and ideas and verbiage to help everybody bridge their way into solving tomorrow's problems today, because you need new language to solve new problems. So if you have any questions about reason engine mapping or answer engine research, the Navigator framework, the Onion framework, all of that, leave them in the comments. Give us a call. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you next time.